Hello and welcome to another edition of Crypto with Chingas. My name is Chingas, and we are still on the interview portions coming from the Texas Bitcoin Conference. This one is with Josh from deCRED, and we have a very good conversation sort of covering the whole deCRED project, their mission, what they're doing, how they do it. It's a very interesting, a very unique twist on all of cryptocurrency. This one is a currency that focuses mostly on governance, how it's funded, how things are developed. You may or may not have heard of them. They never had an ICO, and you'll hear the reasons why they never needed one. So it's a very interesting conversation, very good conversation. I'll have all of the links to the website that we're currently looking at here. They have a bunch of documentation here that's right on the website. You can find all that. I'll leave them for you. They don't have a white paper, but the closest thing to it, if you could dig it up, but I'll leave the link for you, is a Memcoin 2, and this is a 19-page report that was written up, I believe, from the guy who created Monero, right? So don't totally, yeah. Well, you know, we'll address that later. So don't get all crazy on that right now. Anyway, let's start the video. Let's get that rolling, and I'll meet you on the other side. All right, so I'm here with Josh from deCRED. Just go ahead and tell us a little bit more about deCRED. deCRED is one of those projects that seems to be coming up a lot more people are hearing about it, so you guys are on the marketing plan for sure, because it's getting pushed out. But give everybody an idea of who you guys are, what you're doing for the crypto world.
Sure. So deCRED's the first and only chain to do what we call on-chain governance. What that means is we have a formal mechanism to enable dispute resolutions in a decentralized fashion.
Correct, yeah.
So probably a good starting point is actually to give you a little bit of history and historical context on who the project is and sort of why they decided to conceptualize deCRED. So the founding developers behind deCRED were actually Bitcoin developers themselves. So back in 2012, they launched what was at the time the first full node alternate implementation of Bitcoin that wasn't Bitcoin cores. So if you know Ethereum, you've got Geth, Parity, Mist, etc., right? All these competing node implementations. So the deCRED developers initially launched something called BTC Suite, which was an implementation of Bitcoin written in Golang. Now, when they launched it, instead of sort of being met with praise, they found themselves met with quite a bit of hostility, right? And so they were kind of
instead of forking off of BTC, this was running while BTC was still core developed, correct?
Yeah, well, it was actually, they were writing infrastructure for Bitcoin, right? And it was critical infrastructure. So actually, when that most recent, that critical bug was found in the Bitcoin core software, that same vulnerability was not there in the BTC Suite code base.
Okay.
So that vulnerability wasn't in their Golang implementation of Bitcoin. So, you know, if that bug was exploited within the Bitcoin core code base, that would have been catastrophic had we not had alternate implementations to sort of have a fallback onto. So anyways, I guess they kind of felt that it's going to be pretty difficult to scale what should be a decentralized project if we don't have any formal mechanisms in place to resolve dispute resolutions between all of the different sort of conflicting stakeholder groups, whether they be miners, developers, users, etc. And so they got together with an individual or group of individuals called Taco Time. Taco Time was actually the original founder of Monero. So Taco Time forked Monero from Bitcoin back in 2013. And Taco Time had sort of put out this paper called Memcoin 2, which was proposing this hybridized proof of work, proof of stake model. And so Memcoin 2, we don't have a white paper actually, but the closest thing that we do have is probably that Memcoin 2 paper.
Okay.
Whilst it was sort of slightly adjusted to become deCRED, that's kind of the focal point of where it all began.
Now you mentioned proof of work. You also go under a hybrid system, and that's sort of proof of activity. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
So what we have is we kind of blended proof of work with proof of stake. And the rationale for doing so is proof of work these days occasionally gets a dirty name because people get a little bit nervous about it in the context of ASIC mining cartels exerting excessive influence over the system, right? And on the back of that, a lot of people have started to propose pure proof of stake systems, which in my personal view are just not viable. So we kind of said, look, proof of work functions and it works, so there's no point breaking what already works. But we can kind of see some of the merit or some of the attractions to a proof of stake model. But why don't we just blend the two?
Correct.
So the way that our system works is we have proof of work much as it would function in Bitcoin. So you have your miners processing those blocks, signaling the blocks, and protecting the network with their computing power. But we have the stakeholders, so individuals who own the currency and are willing to lock it up for a portion of time, who have the ending say on what protocol level changes get made.
So there's governance between the workers and the stakers.
Well, yes. So in a pure proof of work system, right, you're giving all of this protocol level decision making power to one stakeholder group exclusively, and that's the proof of work miners.
Right.
Now, proof of work miners are an incredibly important part of the network, right? So, there's no reason to be afraid of them. The problem becomes when you give them excessive control over the protocol itself, right? They're one stakeholder group. They're not all of them. And their interests aren't always going to align with all the other stakeholder groups.
Right.
So what we did is we just took that decision-making power and we gave it to stakeholders. Now, miners, too, can be stakeholders if they wish, right?
Correct.
So
they can always mine it and stake
exactly.
it themselves. Yeah,
and so what it allows us to do is just take a broader range of stakeholder interest into account when considering what protocol level changes to make. Now, what's different about our model in comparison to a lot of other projects that are sort of talking about governance is we specifically do something called on-chain governance. What I mean by that is all votes placed in the deCRED system are on-chain and binding. So if we have a particular voting period going on for some kind of feature that's getting implemented, if that voting period passes and there's enough stakeholder support, there's nothing anyone can do to stop that feature from getting implemented.
Okay, so once that vote is cast, it's locked in, it's on the chain, cannot be changed.
Correct.
In any facet.
Exactly. There's no core development foundation that can step in and say, no, even though you voted for it, we're going to veto that.
We disagree. Yeah,
exactly.
And we're going to override
exactly.
that.
And how it works is if you're a stakeholder and you wish to sort of participate in the voting process, you purchase what's called a ticket. The ticket's just an amount of deCRED that fluctuates depending on how many people are staking at any given time. And when you purchase this ticket, what happens is you submit an on-chain vote. So you put your voting preferences, yes, no, or abstain. That gets registered as an on-chain transaction and sits in something we call the stake pool or voting pool, right?
Okay.
With each block that comes through, the miner has to pick at random, I believe it's, a certain number of votes at random, and the majority of those votes needs to be in favor of whatever block type they're signaling.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So if we're, say, signaling for segregated witness, right, and a miner puts forward an anti-segregated witness block, includes 5 votes at random from the pool size, and 3 of those 5 votes are pro-SegWit, that doesn't align with what that miner's putting forward. That miner gets stripped of the reward, and the block's not included. So it gives the miners an economic incentive to follow the demands of or expectations of the broader network of stakeholders.
So if there were just a handful of bad apples, it would really, on the global scheme, it really makes no difference. They'll get pushed out.
And the important thing to note is, deCRED's mantra is all about having skin in the game, right? So a lot of people criticize us and say, oh, you're a plutocracy. And it's kind of a shallow argument, right? Because deCRED's not trying to be a one-person, one-vote democracy. deCRED's an opt-in, alternate financial system, built for those of which it aligns. No one's forcing you to use it, right?
Right.
And it's its model could be more akin, I think of deCRED less as a currency and more of like a new type of organizational structure, right?
Okay.
We would never have any problem with, if we were looking at things in the context of a traditional organization, we wouldn't have a problem with a shareholder having more influence over an intern, for instance, right?
Correct, yeah.
Why? Because the shareholder has skin in the game.
He's got more stake in it.
Well, they have to deal with the consequences of whatever decisions they make,
yeah.
right? So same thing in our case, is if you want to place a vote on the network, you've got to lock up that portion of deCRED on average for 28 days. It could be as long as 3 to 5 months in some certain circumstances. And so whatever decision you're making, you're going to have to deal with the consequences, right?
Right. So you're showing a level of responsibility.
Exactly right.
On the stakeholders end,
Exactly
in order
right.
to say, all right, well, I'm committed to
Exactly
yes.
right.
I'm not just going to throw a yes or no and not do my
No.
research. They're
Exactly.
actually going to get very involved,
Correct.
very educated, and then
Correct.
put forth the answer that they feel would be best for their system.
Exactly right. And it's sort of another reason why, with the exception of these shiny jackets, we tend to be...
They're hard to miss.
We do tend to be pretty subtle in our marketing. And one of the reasons for that is owning deCRED, right, wields someone immense power over our protocol level, decision-making power, process, sorry. So because of that, we're actually incentivized to not try and aggressively push it onto people who are unlikely to actually get proactively involved in the governance process, right? So we're not trying to force it on to sort of uninformed speculators who are just there for a quick flip or aren't going to take the time to fully understand the
right,
project.
so you're separating, we should almost call them clients at this point, but
Yeah.
you're separating people that are investing in deCRED from the general masses who are just looking for just a quick investment, maybe
Exactly
a
right.
pump and dump, whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
to an educated individual who
Exactly.
understands the project and wants to be involved in it.
Exactly right.
That's excellent.
And that's the other thing, right? Is deCRED, whilst it does of course have a founding team, deCRED's built by 60 to 100 people all around the world. So we have contributors in every single major continent on the planet, with the exception of Antarctica.
What a shame.
And they're performing a variety of different roles, right? So they're not all developers, probably about half are. But the rest are a mixture of designers. We do have some marketing people, PR people. We have had some legal professionals come involved. Some do operations, right? There's sort of a really diverse range of contributors. And the reason why we're able to do that is that the protocol actually has its own treasury fund. And we never raise money during an ICO, and we'll never have to, nor have we ever taken in any venture capital money. Why? Because the protocol funds itself.
That's fantastic.
So 10% of all the block reward goes into a decentralized treasury fund. And so we just launched our Politeia proposal system last week.
Excellent.
So Politeia is an ancient Greek word that means a system of government. And Politeia is sort of the system where if you're someone who's involved in the deCRED ecosystem and you see something that, there's a feature that you'd like implemented or there's something you'd like to see change, right? Don't just sit on your ass waiting for someone else to do it, right? The system's been designed in such a way that if you see something that needs doing, get up and do it, right? Propose it to the community. If the community want to see it happen,
Right.
they'll vote for it to get funded, and you'll get resourcing for doing it.
So very similar to a Spotify type environment where work just needs to be done. You're not exactly given a task. You just pick and choose. This is something I want to work on today, and then you work on it because it needs to be done.
Exactly right. It's an open source, a truly open source development community that has a sustainable source of funding, right? Okay. So open source technologies have been traditionally plagued with resourcing issues. It's been incredibly difficult to find ways to economically incentivize developers to work on some of these protocols, right? Because you've got all of these proprietary technologies that are just throwing money at them, right? So in some ways, crypto is the comeback of open source technology, right? You could say that Bitcoin kind of brought a commercial model to open source, or certain open source communities. The trouble is, though, that having a great commercial model is often only half the battle of building a great organization. The other half is managing people, their expectations, coordinating them, right?
Okay, yep.
And that's a whole nother level of complexity when you try to do so in a decentralized fashion.
So the stuff to run a business that nobody ever sees, but it
right.
all has to happen at some point behind the scenes in order for you guys to be operational.
Exactly. And then imagine doing that in a decentralized team, right?
Right.
So deCRED was all about, okay, how can we sort of add on all of what Bitcoin pioneered, right? Because there's a lot right there, but we were kind of feeling that they might have kind of neglected the more human element of building a great organization. Okay. And that's kind of what deCRED was built to address, right? It's, again, beyond a currency, it's a new type of organization and really an experimentation in new types of organizational structures. And the other thing is, when you look at things like the Bitcoin Cash scenario, right? There was a lot of drama there, right? And a lot of that boiled down to the fact that we really had no way of getting sort of absolute clarity on how much support there was for either one. There was a lot of sock puppeting, right? There was right? So in the context of deCRED, all of that voting occurs on chain. So we actually have a definitive point for our dispute resolution.
And there's accountability on both sides.
Exactly right. The other thing that a lot of people oftentimes don't pick up on is our protocol is actually contentious hard fork resisting. So we embrace hard forks because hard forks are an important part of the network sort of evolving and adapting, right? What we want to avoid, though, are those contentious chain splits like you see where you end up with a Bitcoin Cash type scenario where the network just clones itself, splits in two, the hash rate gets diluted, the community gets divided, etc.
Right.
In our case, if we were voting on, say, SegWit, and 80% of our stakeholders approve, 20% don't approve, we reach that 75% threshold. So the vote gets passed. But if that 20% minority go, oh, no, we're not happy with this, we're going to fork off into our own chain, we'll go ahead. The only trouble is the minute they clone that chain and clone all of those balances, that 80% majority still own 80% of the coins on that minority chain.
Correct. Okay.
So they've got to accumulate the majority of the hashing power and maintain it, and then they've got to accumulate the majority of the coins.
You know, that's the beauty of proof of activity. That's
exactly
the beauty of merging work with staking.
Exactly right.
So that you can avoid certain issues where the miners can take control or the stakers can take control.
Exactly right. And you know, we sort of just want to be a self-sustaining, self-operating, decentralized network that's able to sort of constantly evolve and adapt as its stakeholders feel necessary, right? So just because we have the governance feature in place, which enables us to sort of add or remove features with very little friction, doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to add, you know, hundreds and hundreds of features.
Right, but the opportunity is there,
exactly.
And the ease of use is there if and when a feature
if
does
and
come
when
up.
it's needed, right? And that was the whole point. And you know, there's been a lot of criticism of organizations like Blockstream that have taken in venture capital funding, and a lot of people worry that there might be a conflict of interest there, right? And look, I'm not going to say whether there is or not. How could I possibly? I don't have no idea. But the whole point there is that is a pretty valid concern and a potential attack vector.
One of which deCRED will never have.
Exactly. That's the point, right? Is if we want a genuinely decentralized protocol, then we need to make sure that it has a genuinely decentralized and sustainable method of resourcing that is sort of capable of withstanding the potential financial pressures that, you know, a malicious actor is probably likely to apply if crypto ever becomes particularly threatening. We follow a very similar mantra to the Bitcoin community in that if we're going to scale, we need to do so without any compromises, right? We need to scale responsibly in a manner that doesn't sacrifice network decentralization, right? And the other thing is, it's like all these people you have a lot of people talking about, oh, we need mass mainstream adoption, and you know, we need mom and dads buying their coffee with it, right? It's like maybe one day. But that day isn't today, right? Because even if the protocols could scale to that level, how are these people going to manage their keys? How are these people going to keep themselves safe?
Let's work out all the little problems that arise along the way before just jumping across the finish line and say, all right, we're here.
Yeah, it's like, guys, there are so many steps required for us to even get close to that point.
Right.
So let's sort of take it one at a time and grow sustainably, you know?
Well, that sounds smart. And with your voting system in place, it sounds like it's an ideal situation to take those things one step at a time. Now, you do lock up per vote. There are going to be opportunities where there's going to be multiple votes in motion during the same period of time.
That's right.
So that'll also significantly put the responsibility on the stakeholders to stake more coins in order to make those votes, which again, I really like. I think that makes the decision making very less haphazard and far more responsible. So moving forward, I think that's going to be something that's really going to help.
Yeah, definitely. And look, I mean, we've got 50%, almost 50% of the circulating supply is locked up, being staked right now, right?
Wow, that's amazing.
And that's a big validation for us because it shows that the community are really, really actively engaged in the governance process,
correct.
right? So that's kind of nice to see. And it also signals that people have, medium to long-term support. Faith in the protocol, right? Is they have a pretty positive outlook if they're willing to sort of sacrifice that liquidity.
For sure. Well, I can't appreciate it enough. Thank you for the time. Let us know where we can find you. deCRED.com?
deCRED.org.
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 Very good.
Probably the best place if you're looking for information is jump into our community channels. So our Slack, Discord, and Riot chat are all bridged together. So if you send a message on one, it'll show up on all the others.
That makes sense.
And that's where all the debate happens, all the discussion. Yeah, it's a fun place to be.
Mention the white paper that you don't have, but the similar one. Mention the
Memcoin 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that can be found.
You'd have to Google it.
Okay,
it might be somewhere on the website. I'm not sure,
problem.
but if you Google it, it'll show up somewhere.
Awesome.
But yeah, that's a good starting point to understanding deCRED. Another thing there's sort of two resources that I particularly like. One is titled, I believe, A Brief History of deCRED or something. It sort of takes you through a lot of historical.
I love that one. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah.
And then the other one is Richard Red has a guy called Richard Red on Medium has a great post covering the governance model.
Okay.
I definitely recommend that one.
Excellent. Awesome.
Hey,
thank you so much.
Thank you very much
Appreciate
for taking the time.
Yeah.
And we're back, so I hope you got some knowledge out of that. I hope you got a little bit of information, something that you just didn't know about before. Again, if you're interested in the project, all the links will be down below. I thought it was a fantastic conversation. I already knew about them prior to going to the event, but to be able to speak to someone at the event with as much knowledge and involvement into the project itself is, it's refreshing. It's also refreshing to put faces to projects and be able to hold people accountable. But it was good. We did end up seeing Marco there, Marco Peerborn, so he's one of the core developers. So in any event, I hope you got something out of it. That is the point of all of these videos, is just try to get a little information out there that may have escaped you at some point, and give everybody the opportunity to speak. You know what I mean? So that's it. That's a wrap. Already too long-winded. I apologize. I'm sorry. Hope you have a great rest of whatever day, night, whatever you're in the middle of right now. And see you on the exchanges. Happy trade. Okay, yeah. Peer boom. Oh, I forgot to talk about Memcoin. Holy cow, what am I talking about? I did talk about it in the intro. Yeah, we're good. We're good on that. Memcoin 2. I completely forgot to mention that in the intro. Man, I'm tired.